The Salvation by Grace YouTube page is off to a rollicking start, and I want to thank all the folks who have already subscribed to this channel and all the positive feedback that we've gotten via email and via Facebook. Thanks for all that positive feedback, and thanks for the folks who have sent us questions they would like us to address. If I just start answering those questions, we've got material for lots and lots of upcoming videos. We'll see how much of it we can get to. But thanks very much for all the positive feedback. Sure do appreciate it. And the view counts have been pretty good, so it's well worth continuing in this enterprise. Speaking of questions that came via Facebook, I received this one. It says, "Hey gentlemen, I know you guys are probably extremely busy. I just wanted to know if you would answer these questions. Why did God put the tree in the garden? And why does God create Adam and Eve knowing that they're going to sin?" I know those are tough questions. A lot of people have been asking about this around work. I'd appreciate the help. Thanks. Well, in fact, it's not that difficult if we just look at these things from God's perspective. We have a tendency, being human beings, to kind of view everything through the lens of our own human experience, what we're able to comprehend here in the flesh. It's real hard for us to get those great, big, eternal perspectives, the big overview of what's going on in the Bible. But in order to answer that question, and in order to understand what happened in the Garden of Eden, we need to see it from God's perspective. After all, it was God who was doing it. And he was doing it on purpose. He had a plan. Now, we understand that. I mean, if you're going to build a house, you start with a blueprint. You start with a plan. You don't just start hammering nails into wood. In fact, forget a house. Even if you were just going to build a shed to put your lawnmower in, you're still going to come with a plan. If you're going to build anything, a desk, a table, even if you buy a new piece of software, it comes with instructions because there's a plan at work. Well, God, before he created everything, had a plan. And his plan was twofold. Number one, his plan was his own glory. God is in the enterprise of glorifying himself. We need to remember that. What God does, he does to demonstrate the glory of his grace. That's a phrase that Paul uses frequently to explain why and how God does things. He does things for the glory of his grace. He's glorifying himself. Secondly, it's his intention that his Son receive the preeminence in all things. That's why Paul would write that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The purpose of making everybody in heaven, on earth, under the earth, they're all going to confess, they're all going to bow the knee. In order to confess that Jesus is Lord, preeminent over everything. After all, we know that everything was made by him and through him and for him. And secondly, it's all being done to the glory of God the Father. So keep that in mind. What God does, he does on purpose, according to his plan, and he does it for his own glory. Now, with that in mind, we can talk about the big picture stuff. For instance, in the book of Revelation, we read that Jesus is the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. That's Revelation 13:8. We also read about a book that's called the Lamb's Book of Life, which has names written in it, and those names are written before the foundation of the world. Well, there's the plan. The plan is that God's going to save some people, and the plan is so definite that he writes down the names of the people he intends to save before he makes anything. And so in his exhaustive omniscience of all things, and with his omnipotent ability to make everything work the way he wants it to work, he's able to decree the end from the beginning. And so he establishes the beginning with a mind toward the end. The end is his glory and the preeminence of his Son. So he writes down names in a book, the Lamb's Book of Life, and then calls the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Now, if the Lamb is already in place as a sacrifice, if Christ is already seen in the economy of God as slain before the foundation of the world, then there has to be a reason for him to be slain. There has to be a reason for that sacrifice. Why would he be a sacrifice unless there are people who require a sacrifice, who will require a Savior, who will require someone to save them so utterly and completely that he will get all the glory in the way that he saves them? And so God designed a circumstance that would bring about creatures who were fallen, who needed a Savior. And he did that in the garden. Now, I assume that God, in his absolute sovereignty, could have kept the tree of the knowledge of good and evil out of the garden if he wanted to. I mean, he told Adam, you can freely eat from every tree that's in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's in the center of the garden. From that one, you can't eat. In fact, when Satan tempted Eve, she went so far as to say, we can't eat from it, we can't even touch it. So they were really clear about what the rule was. Don't eat from that tree. But if God really didn't want them to eat from that tree, don't put it in the garden. I can figure that out. And if I can figure it out, so can God. Why put the temptation in the garden if you don't want them to eat from it? And then I also assume that God could have kept Satan out of the garden if he wanted to. I mean, after all, we read in the book of Revelation that God is going to seal up Satan for 1,000 years, keep him bound so he can't deceive the nations anymore. If God has that capability, if he has the ability to seal up Satan or keep him out of particular circumstances, he could certainly have kept him out of the garden. But he didn't. In other words, God created creatures that were capable of falling. Then he gave them the temptation, the tree, and said, don't eat from it. And then allowed the tempter in to draw Eve's attention to that one rule and say, hasn't God said that you can eat from every tree? And when she says we can eat from every tree except that one, and we can't even touch it, he says, God knows that when you eat from it, you'll be like God. There's the temptation. The temptation is human pride. God knows that when you eat that, you'll be like God, and God couldn't stand that kind of competition. He doesn't want anyone else to be God. He wants to be the only God. Well, now think big picture again, because we read in Ezekiel, we read in Isaiah that the fall of Satan came about because Satan said, I will place my throne in the place of the north, and I will be like God. And that was the beginning of his downfall. So he was cast out of the heavenly realm, and as a result, he's in the earth, tempting Eve with the exact same temptation, saying, God knows that when you eat it, you'll be like God, and God doesn't want you to be like God. So, you have the people who are capable of falling. They were created as creatures that could fall, as demonstrated by the fact that they do fall. You have the temptation, the tree. You have the rule, don't eat from that tree. And you have the tempter who has access to the garden and to Eve. Now, all of those circumstances are under God's absolute sovereign control. But he has a plan. His plan is that there would be people who would need a Savior in order that his Son would be glorified. And so he designed the exact specific circumstances that would bring about the exact specific result, which is that human beings would fall into sin, would fall into depravity, and the lamb slain before the foundation of the world would become an absolute necessity. What's the end result? The end result is exactly what God planned before the foundation of the world. That there will be a people, a massive group of people, so numerous that no man could count them, and they will forever be in heaven, singing the praises of the Lamb who was slain. That's the purpose. God will get all the glory. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The Lamb slain before the foundation of the world will have a redeemed people who will be trophies of his grace to glorify him for all time. That's the purpose. That's why the tree, the garden, the fall. I hope that helps.